Hello everyone and welcome to 𝐏𝐀 Interactive. My name is Eduardo Fernandez and I'm here to answer one of the most common questions I get asked all the time on social media and all the demos I attend. And that question is, how to easily achieve a more or less realistic wood effect in as few steps as possible. For this video I'm going to use a resin model of the German Mauser rifle that was used during the Second World War that comes in our Hindu soldier kit from Abteilung, as well as one of the products we launched in December, our inks. I'm very proud of this product because I was personally involved in its creation. The product is perfect for this kind of work because the inks are very colour intense, extremely bright and also semi-transparent. That last characteristic is going to help enormously in my process to simulate wood. I'm going to use one of the inks in this set of 3 colours, the materials set, specifically the wood brown. It's a shade of brown as you can see in this set of 3 shades of brown. Let me take it out of the box and show you. As you can see, although it might seem quite dark at first sight, it's going to help us a lot to achieve the wood effect we're looking for due to that semi-transparent quality. It can also be used for other types of projects, but it's ideal for wood and for what I'm going to be doing here. So let's get started. The first thing I need to do is apply a coat of grey primer using an airbrush. This is a universal primer that can be used for all sorts of projects and is perfect for this. I'll use my airbrush and I'll start to apply my primer until I have an even finish all over the model. I want to cover it completely because although the resin itself is grey, the shade of the primer is completely different. I also need to cover the entire piece so the paint sticks properly later. Right, my piece has a nice even coat of primer all over that will allow the paint to stick properly. Now what I'm going to do is apply a coat of brown to get started on the wood. For that coat of brown, I'm going to use an equal mix of 𝐴𝐾11100 light brown and 𝐴𝐾11115 light earth. Using the airbrush again, I'll paint all the wooden parts on the model. Just as before, I want to get a nice even finish in the end. Okay, that's the brown paint mix applied all over the rifle. But as you can see, our gun has no relief whatsoever. It's looking very flat. To achieve a little more depth and 3-dimensionality, I'm going to need to apply some shadow effects, especially on the underside of the rifle because I imagine that it will eventually be used in a horizontal position. To get this done, I'm going to add a little 𝐴𝐾11418 brown black to my previous mixture to darken it a little. And again, using the airbrush, I can now apply some shadow effects to the underside of the model. So now I've got my rifle with its light and shadow effects done, as you can see. All the volumes have been highlighted properly and it's starting to look more realistic already. Now I want to deepen the shadows even more in those parts not touched by the light at all and in the areas where the metal comes into contact with the wood. I'm going to do that with a thin brush and some very diluted black paint. As I said, I want to profile the parts most in shadow now. Right, as you can see, I've finished with the shading effects and the relief for the parts next to the metal, so they can be highlighted later. Now, using a mixture of black red and brown black, I'm going to paint the wood grain. This will create a negative effect that will become visible under the ink after I apply it later. So here goes with the grain. As you can see, I'm painting two different types of lines here. These main lines represent the rings in the wood, which are a little more defined and clearer to see, but should be uniform and consistent across the entire surface, while the others are secondary lines to represent additional graining, just for a nice touch on the wood. Right, that's the grain finished now. As you can see, it's consistent across the top and the bottom. And now I'm going to add some detail that is very common for this type of wood on models. I'm talking about the darker areas that would represent dirt from where the gun has been held. Here, for example, this part would be darker than the rest of the rifle because of the dirt on the user's hands. And how do I do that, you ask? Well, by using some abtailing pigment called black smoke. So here I go. You need to be very careful with these pigments because they're very intense, very strong colour. So I'm going to take a bit and dab it onto some paper, and then I will carefully apply it to the areas that have supposedly gotten dirty through contact with some hands. Hand holds the rifle so it can pull the trigger, and the other part would be where the other hand would hold the rifle. Okay, the next step will be to apply the wood colour ink, which is this wood brown in this box. You can find it individually or as part of the materials ink set from 𝐏𝐀 Interactive. As you can see, this ink is semi-transparent and has a colour that looks very similar to wood. I'm going to apply it using an airbrush. After putting some ink in my fluid cap, and so the effect isn't as strong as it could be, I personally always like to dilute it with a bit of water. I prefer to go over the model a few extra times with this than just once but ruin the whole effect. I'm mixing it well, and then I will go over the rifle. Always test first, and then start covering all the work we did before. The goal is to blur the grain lines I painted earlier. The ink is also going to help me fix the pigment in those dirty areas. So just keep applying the ink, letting it dry in between layers to see how it's coming along. As you can see, as I continue to apply more and more layers, those grain lines I painted earlier become fainter and fainter, blurring into the wood more. So now I've got the wood looking just how I want it. You can see the grain, but it's not glaringly obvious. Now, in order to reduce the shine that these inks create, because they are gloss inks after all, I'm going to use a matte varnish. I prefer the matte version and not the ultra matte version because wood does have a little shine to it, so it would look a little odd if I used the ultra matte version. That said, I'm going to go over the model using my airbrush and the matte varnish. Now that the wood effect is finished, I'm going to start painting all the non-wooden elements black. So with a brush and my black acrylic, I'm going to get painting. I want to cover everything properly so as not to leave anything unpainted. Now comes the fun bit of working with wood effects, and that's painting all the little details. Scratches, marks, all that stuff, as well as adding some highlights for extra volume. I'm going to use some acrylic paints to do that. The mahogany brown mixed with the light brown to be specific. And I'll use a little ochre orange for the final highlighting. So I'm going to make a mix and start adding some details. Now that's the wood finished, with all the scratches and all the wear effects that I wanted to create. Now I'm going to paint the metal parts. For that I will use a mix of black and graphite to add light, highlights and volumes to all the metal parts on the gun. I'm going to start with quite a dark grey to add volume to all the metal parts. I need to take extra care not to accidentally get any paint on the wood, because my work is practically finished and I don't want to ruin it now. Right, all the metal has been painted with acrylic paint now, and I want to show you a little trick to help blur the transitions and give it a more realistic look. Take a pencil lead, or any pencil you have lying around, and scrape some off onto a piece of paper. Then you have to use a tool that we all have at home, a finger. Get some of the lead on your finger and rub it all over the metal surfaces. This will create a very realistic shine effect, especially on the upper section, which is the part receiving the most light. Obviously, try not to touch the wood and ruin it. Just look how it blurs the transitions and adds that classic metal shine. It's especially good for the metal on weapons. I'm going to do the same on the trigger as well. I want to get it into all the corners and make sure it's properly done. And there you go. Right, well there you have it. One finished rifle after just a short painting session with quite a realistic effect that I have achieved by simulating the wood with our wood brown ink to make the most of its semi-transparent characteristics. Remember, the less ink you use, the lighter the gun will be, and the more ink you use, the grain will be less visible and the gun will be darker. You can see that in this other example, where the grain is less visible and the gun is darker overall. This lets you create different versions of the same gun. From more ink here to less ink here. And you could even use less ink for an even lighter gun on which the grain would be even more visible. It's entirely up to you. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video and that you give our inks a go, because they're truly excellent. Thanks for watching and see you next time.